Hey Mary, hey Paris. It's good to see you all. Hey Quadulin. Welcome. Hey Miss Sharon. Hi there. Hey my brother David, how you doing, man? All the way from North Carolina. Good to have you. This is going to be a really good topic tonight. If you all would, start sharing the video. Let them know that we're here. We're getting ready to shake some tables tonight, okay? Hey, Jay from New Jersey, my East Coast brother. Go ahead and start sharing the video. Again, we want to get as many folks in the room as we can. I think this is going to be a really, really good conversation tonight. Amen. And we want as many people as possible to join in this conversation. So good to see everybody on this first Thursday. Can y'all believe it's May already? Isn't that amazing? Hey, I see that. Uncle Vaughn. Hey, man, it's good to have you. Good to have you. Y'all put in the comments and let me know if the video and the sound are looking okay. I'm getting this notification that says I got a slow connection. So just let me know if it's looking okay, all right? All right, we're going to wait about another minute or so for folks to find their way over here. And we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, Paris. Thank you. Hey, sis. I heard y'all got a whole lot of rain down there. You all right? You didn't float away, I see. All right, about 60 more seconds and we're going to go ahead and dive in. Oh, wow. Well, I'm glad you're good now. Glad you're good. All right. Brother Dion, it's good to see you, man. It's good to see everybody here tonight. It's good to see you. Great to have your energy in this space. I'm really, really looking forward to this conversation. As I do every month, I really try to be thoughtful and prayerful about the things that we're going to talk about. I really want to always be relevant. I want to try to be timely. concerning those things that we talk about, because I really want these times to hopefully make life a little bit better for you, to give you some things to really chew on, things to think about, and give you space to deconstruct, maybe some old ways of thinking or old ways of being, and give you tools also to begin to reconstruct how it is that you feel best in living out the days that are before you. I believe very much in agency. I believe that God put each of us here in the earth and gave us the authority and the will to decide what our lives would look like. And unfortunately, too many times, religious structures take that agency and take that autonomy away, and they suppress who we really are. Too many times, I've said this before, and you'll probably hear me say it again, that, going to church, a lot of times you had to leave your brain in the car. You couldn't come in as a thinking person. You couldn't come in with questions. You couldn't come in and say that you're wrestling or that you're not sure about certain things. Church just didn't give you a space to do that. Do I have a witness? And so here on Shake the Table, I want to give you space to wrestle and to repent, really in the truest form, to think again, to look back and think about those things again, maybe from a different perspective and a different paradigm. And so having this conversation tonight about sex, human sexuality in particular, and how that plays out in the context of the church, I think a lot of us need space to reform how we think about the subject. If you came from a fundamentalist background, whether that was, Baptist or Methodist or Pentecostal, whatever, if you came from a fundamentalist type of background, you will know that the conversation about sex was one basically where you were just really kind of told how you were supposed to do it, but never really given the tools in how to figure out how to do it. And that's why so many of us have either witnessed or been victims of, or in other kinds of ways been adjacent to some kind of messed up sexual perspectives. Again, do I have a witness? Okay. Sex has always been this taboo subject at church. It's always been this thing this dirty thing that we couldn't really talk about. And too many of us had to figure it out on the playground or figure it out on the internet, if you're young enough, because back, when I was trying to figure this out, we didn't have internet and all this stuff. But, we've had to find alternative ways to figure it out, instead of really having a healthy understanding of human sexuality and what the Bible does and does not say about human sexuality. Now I'm going to say this, just again, as I'm trying to set us up, we're going to talk tonight. Okay. And so if you one that, is given to clutching your pearls, you probably going to clutch some pearls tonight. Okay. So I'm just trying to let you know up front. Okay. Now we're not going to be, doing anything inappropriate or disrespectful or any of those kinds of things, but we're going to talk about sex. S-E-X. Turn to your neighbor and say sex. That's even hard for some people to say, because again, from the church backgrounds that we've come from, we have been conditioned to think and feel about sex that it is something that is dirty. And that is unfortunate. Okay? Because as an adult person who has experienced sex, I would say it is one of the greatest gifts that God has given us. Amen. Amen. And so we want to talk about it tonight, okay? From many different perspectives, if we can. I want to say also, in the way of a disclaimer, there is no way that in these next, maybe 40 minutes that we have, that we're going to be able to exhaust this conversation. That is not the intention. The intention is to raise questions, to present subject matter for you to really think about and be able to study on your own. And I'm actually going to make some recommendations, just a few tonight, of some reading maybe that you can do on your own. Okay, so that's enough of that. Let me dive into this. Hopefully I can get through all of this, because the truth is this needs to probably be a 6 or 8 week series, teaching series. Oh, I see TQ just said that, do a series. We'll think about that, okay? But I'm going to try my best to get through the notes that I have taken for tonight. And if there's some stuff left over, then we may sit with coming back to revisit some things, okay? So again, tonight, we are talking about human sexuality in the context of the church, okay? Because talking about sex at work or on the playground or with your homeboys is one thing, but dealing with sex in the context of the church, unfortunately, is a whole other thing, okay? So I'm going to try to dig some of that up, okay? So one would ask, why do you want to talk about this? Why is this even important? And I'm not trying to be dramatic or anything like that, but I want to say very clearly that this conversation and how it has been presented for many of us, maybe even most of us, has actually diminished the quality of our lives. It has diminished. We have not been able to live into the fullness of our humanity and sexual expression, because in the context of the church, we weren't allowed to investigate those things, okay? And again, I said, I want to make your life better. I want to go even deeper, okay? For some of us, it didn't allow us to really optimize or live to the fullness of our sexuality. But for some folks, this whole matter has been deadly. There have been people who have literally died from the guilt, died from the miseducation of this. Literally, their lives were snuffed out because they were not educated and given the space to really learn about their sexual beings. Okay, so this is a big deal. It's important. Okay, so that's why we're talking about it. So I got a whole long laundry list of things that I want to talk about tonight as it relates to sexuality, topics that we've heard in church. And so indulge me. Okay, just indulge me. The first thing I want to talk about is something called fornication. Anybody ever heard the word fornication? Probably more than you wanted to, okay? We were all warned about fornicating, okay? But who has ever been in a class where anybody broke down what fornication really is or why we were warned against it? I wasn't. I don't know anybody else that was, okay? So I want to give you some things as it relates to this whole topic, and hopefully it'll put some other things in context for us, okay? Fornication, the biblical meaning of it, or definition of fornication, you can see it in the Hebrew Bible, or what we call the Old Testament, and it can also be found in the New Testament. They have kind of nuanced meanings, varying shades of meaning, depending upon if you read it in the Hebrew text or if you read it in the New Testament. In the Hebrew text or in the Old Testament, fornication was defined or characterized as all sexual sin And that's problematic in and of itself, but I'd have to we don't have time to dig into that the way I want to. But fornication in the Old Testament was considered to be all sexual sin that was prohibited by the Mosaic law and by Jewish custom. For those of you who may be Islamic, my Muslim brothers and sisters, there's some very similar kind of perspective when you look in the Quran or in the Hadith as it relates to sexual sin. Okay. But again, the whole point is that when we look at religion and sexuality, it is oppressive. Okay. So it is defined as any or all sexual sin that's prohibited by the Mosaic law and Jewish custom. The Hebrew word translated as fornication also carried the meaning of idolatry. I need you to hear that. So fornication was not just about these sex acts, but there was a connotation that connected fornication to idolatry, to idol worship. Okay? You got to know that. As a matter of fact, let me just go ahead and for my same gender loving people who have had to get hit over the head with Leviticus 18 and 22 and Leviticus chapter 20 and 13, where it says a man should not lay with a man as he lays with a woman. That comes from a part of Leviticus that is called the Holiness Code. And Leviticus in general is a prescription for the tribe of Levi, the priests who were responsible for worship in the temple. So all through Leviticus, it is talking to them about how you do sacrifices, when you can do it, what days, all of these different rules. And then all of a sudden in 18 and in chapter 20, it seems to be talking about homosexuality. Well, it's completely out of context. If you read Leviticus chapter 17, 18, all through that, again, it's talking about idolatry. And so when you fit Leviticus 18 and 22 and Leviticus 20 and 13 into that context, you have a better understanding of what that was talking about. But I'll get to that later on when we talk about homosexuality. But here, the word fornication is tied to the idea of idolatry. And the reason is because when other pagan religions around the Israelites would go up to worship some of these other gods, what they would do is they would engage in sexual acts with these temple prostitutes. And what that was to do was to get them to this place of euphoria. You know how it is when it's real good to you. It is euphoric. It's like the world opens up and the universe is revealed to you. And it puts you in a place of being able to draw closer to that God. Okay. So in the context of the Old Testament, when it talks about idolatry, it was talking about men, because women were not allowed to go up to worship. It was talking about men having these sex acts with these temple prostitutes in oblation to these other gods. I know I just said a whole mouthful. Y'all forgive me if that was too heavy and too much, but that's the context that fornication was used in the Old Testament. Are you all following me? Let me know that you're still there. Send me some hearts or thumbs up or something, okay? So that's Old Testament fornication. Well, when we look in the New Testament, okay, the word fornication comes from this Greek word called porneia, P-O-R-N-E-I-A, porneia. It's where we get the word pornography or pornographic from, porneia, okay? This is the Greek word for fornication. And what this did is it was like this umbrella term. And so it included any form of sexual expression that was outside of the marriage covenant. So premarital sex, extramarital sex or adultery, homosexuality, which again, I got to come back to because in this time, there was no concept or word for homosexuality. So as a side note, every time you see the word homosexuality or homosexual in the Bible, it is a mistranslation. There was no concept of it at all when the biblical writers put these texts together. But again, I digress. Let me keep going. It included bestiality. It included masturbation. In other words, fornication was any sexual expression that was not within the confines of a covenant marriage. Okay? So, voluntary intercourse with any persons that were not married is considered fornication. Let me go deeper. It is important when you are reading scripture, particularly when you read what seems to be a command or a directive or a rule, you always have to ask why. Why is this here? Why did the writer write this? To whom are they speaking? What is the situation that caused this to be written? You've got to ask why. And when you ask that question, it leads to other questions. It leads to you thinking about particular scenarios that could call this particular subject matter to the forefront. Fornication. Why should we not have sexual relations with anyone outside of marriage? Why should we do that? Why should we live that way? Is it possible that because in this time, the bloodline, the legacy, the legitimacy of a child being born was extremely important? And again, some of this stuff that we know of and understand right now in terms of sexual expression, they didn't know about those things. What they were thinking about was a man having a sexual encounter with a woman, and that a seed would be planted and that a child would be born from that sexual encounter. Okay? So, for a man and a woman to get together and have sex and there be a possibility of a child being born, it calls into question and raises the probability and the problematic nature of a child being born illegitimately. It creates a whole problem for the bloodline. It creates a whole problem for the legacy. Who does this child really belong to? Because in those times, if a woman had sexual relations and she was married, it didn't matter who she had sex with. That child belonged to her husband. Are y'all following me? This is the whole issue with Jesus being born to Mary, and Joseph was the husband. Although technically, so they say, Mary didn't get pregnant by Joseph, but because Mary was betrothed or married to Joseph, that was Joseph's baby. Are y'all following me? Okay? And so when we talk about, you can't have sex outside of this covenant, it may have been because they were concerned about creating these illegitimate children and messing up the bloodline. I don't know. Maybe that's why. Maybe that's not. But again, you got to ask the question. Could it be, when we talk about fornication, that it is a matter of ownership rights? Let's talk about it now. Women didn't get to marry the man that they loved. They didn't get to marry the one that gave them butterflies on the inside. They married the one that their father sold them to. Uh-oh, the table is shaking. That's what a dowry is all about. When families would enter into relationship in marriage, when a father would give a daughter to another family, it may have been a business arrangement. It could have been some sort of debt type situation. It could have been clout chasing, that a family was trying to come up some. So let's marry this daughter into this other family. Okay. And so when that woman went from being basically owned by her father, you know who owns who by their last name. That's why women, when they get married, they change their last name, because it goes from being owned by your father to now being owned by your husband. I just messed up your whole wedding ceremony. That's where that comes from. Slaves had their owners' last names. That's how black people got their names. Women. Are we understanding how this works? What was it called in the Greek? The paterfamilia. So the householder, his name was on everything and everybody. Okay? So maybe this whole prohibition against this fornication was that, hey, bruh, I own her. You can't be having sex with her. It was an ownership transgression, maybe. Okay? These are just things that you want to think about. Now, what is said is that the reason that these sexual expressions should not take place outside of the marriage covenant is because it defiled the covenant. Because marriage is supposed to be a physical, visible, earthly expression of the relationship that God has with God's people. Okay. And to go outside of that defiles that covenant. And so the official reasoning for not doing it is because it defiles the covenant. But again, you got to ask, is it a matter of this bloodline stuff? Is it a matter of ownership? Is there something else going on here? Okay. And we're just raising questions tonight. Okay. We're just raising questions. But this whole matter of fornication, it comes down to a matter of what's called morality. It was considered immoral to have any type of sex outside of the marriage covenant. Immoral. That's a word. Somebody type that. Immoral. I-M-M-O-R-A-L. It was considered immoral. Now, oh, Lord, I go too deep sometimes, but I got to do this because y'all have to understand this, okay? Morality is a philosophical term. It is a construct, a human construct, okay? Morality is basically defined as what is right and what is wrong. What is socially acceptable, what is unacceptable, okay? It is a social construct. So let me go deeper with this. What may be moral or immoral for one group may not necessarily be moral or immoral for another group, because it is a construct. The people decide, the society decides what is right and what is wrong. Okay? And so in this context, these sexual expressions were considered immoral because the people of that time said they were immoral. Lord, where do I want to go with this? See, this whole matter of morality has to be factored into something called the evolution of morality. Basically, what that means is that these smart people, okay, these social scientists have said that there is this thing called evolution of morality. In other words, as society progresses, their ideas about morality, it changes. It has to. When you become educated or enlightened, or you have different experiences, what you consider right or wrong sometimes will change, okay? And so because morality is this construct and morality has this possibility of evolution, you have to understand this. This is so important, beloved, that these moral imperatives that you read in the Bible, every single one of them is a snapshot of what the moral code was at that time. Because the biblical canon is closed, we only have a snapshot of what morality really is. How is it that in 2024, we take a snapshot of the moral code of people who lived 2 and 3 and 4 and 5,000 years ago? It is a snapshot. And so trying to apply a sexual ethic or sexual morality from that time to this time is irresponsible. I'm going to just say that. I'm going to leave it there. Whoever it makes mad, just be mad about it. But it's lazy and it is irresponsible to try to apply a morality from millennia ago to people who are living now. Let me get off of that because I got too much more I got to talk about. Okay, so let's dig deeper. Okay? So this whole idea about fornication, like I said, it's any sexual expression that is outside the covenant of marriage, whether it is premarital, extramarital, whatever, okay? It leads us to another thing that we see show up in church called purity culture. Anybody ever hear of that before? Purity culture? If you came up in church, if you were a part of the youth group, the Bible band, whatever it was, if you were a young person in church, probably more than anything else, you heard about abstaining from premarital sex. That it just seemed like that's all it was. If you could just get through high school with your legs closed, you have pleased God. Okay? And so the whole idea of, teenagers not being able to go out on dates, it was because people were afraid they were going to have sex. Can we just say it like it is? Don't you go upstairs and close that door because I know you're going to be having sex. It was sex. Why are church people so preoccupied with sex? Don't answer that. Because I don't know, but I just wonder. We just preoccupied with it. But this whole purity culture, in some churches, some would wear the purity ring. When you would make this covenant with God that I'm going to save myself from marriage, and you would put a ring on and basically you'd be married to Jesus. That was all a matter of purity culture. And what purity culture did was make teenage people, young people, afraid to explore their sexuality, to ask questions about their sexuality. Purity culture made masturbation a sin. You couldn't do it with nobody else. You couldn't do it with yourself either. You just had to lock it up. Okay? And while I just made that mention of masturbation, I want you to know that the Bible does not speak to masturbation at all. The closest that they get to it is a story that you find in the Old Testament, is the story of Onan, O-N-A-N. He was a young man whose brother was killed. And in that time, if you were a man and you died, your brother had to marry your wife and get her pregnant so that your bloodline could continue. So all of these folks that's talking about biblical marriage and stuff, you don't even know what biblical marriage is. I'll have to do a class on that one day. But Onan, got with his brother's wife. And again, it was his job to go in, to have sex with her, to get her pregnant so that his brother could have lineage. Well, Onan went in and his pullout game was strong. So before he climaxed, before he planted his seed, he withdrew from her, and it says his seed fell on the ground. Anybody following me? Anybody know this story? His seed fell on the ground. And so bad biblical exegesis says, well, if a boy is masturbating, mind you, we're not talking about no girls. If a boy is masturbating or a man is masturbating and his seed falls on the ground, then he has committed a sin. Because the Bible does say that God struck Onan dead, which again is a whole other problem. But the issue here was not that Onan was masturbating. The issue was not even that his seed fell on the ground. The issue was that he broke a tradition. He broke what was considered God's law. He was disobedient. And that disobedience is what cost Onan his life, not him touching himself. Are we okay with that? Okay. And again, I want y'all to study all of this for yourself. I'm not coming with anything that I made up. I'm just telling you what's in the book. Okay. So purity culture has messed up a whole lot of young people, and it caused them to grow up underdeveloped in terms of their sexuality, in terms of their perspectives and understandings and comfort with their own sexuality. Okay. And I want to free some people. There's some adults right now who are still stuck with the guilt that came from purity culture. But I need to move on. Something else that you hear of in church quite a bit, particularly for single people, is being celibate. Praying and asking God for the grace and the willpower and the discipline to remain celibate. There are some people who have made the decision to be celibate because we have been taught that that's how you get closer to God. It is a part of something called asceticism, or being ascetic. The way you spell that is ASCETIC, ascetic. If you read some of the desert fathers and desert mothers, there were people who would go out literally into the desert to live by themselves. They would go out there and they would deny themselves food. They would fast for days upon end. They would deny themselves water. They would beat their bodies. They would try to stand up. They wouldn't lay down. They would, of course, because they were by themselves, they would not engage in sexuality. All of these ascetic practices were for the purpose of them drawing closer to God. They didn't indulge in anything that was pleasurable. So if it tastes good, felt good, smelled good, any of those things, they denied those things from an ascetic perspective. Well, celibacy is a holdover for that for a lot of people in the church. They really believe that if it feels good, it must not be God. That's what fasting is about. That chocolate cake, that tastes too good. That's too indulgent. You need to fast. You need to get that flesh under subjection. All of that is ascetic. Okay? I don't know of any place, and I've read the Bible a bunch of times, where God has required of us to injure ourselves or beat ourselves or deny ourselves the pleasure of God's goodness and bounty in the earth. Those are decisions that we have made. And unfortunately, there are a lot of people who are ascetic in their thinking, have basically put that onto other people. And for them to say, okay, this is how I define holiness, so this is what holiness must be. So for you to be holy, you got to be like me. Okay? And so I want to lift that up and hopefully take some of that guilt away and help you to understand that you don't have to be miserable to be holy. I just said a whole mouthful. You don't have to deny yourself all of the goodness of God to be holy. That is ascetic. And that is a decision that people can make for themselves if they want to, but they can't force that on you. Okay. Let me try to move through here. I want to give you an example, just as it relates to this whole thing about the body, and pleasures of the body. Paul said something in his first letter to the Corinthians, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 8 and 9. He was talking about being married. Paul says, so I say to those who are not married and to widows, it is better to stay unmarried, just as I am. Remember how I told you they try to put that on you? Stay unmarried, just as I am. But if you cannot control yourself, then you should go ahead and marry, because it is better to marry so you can have sex. It is better to marry and have that covenant in place than for you to burn in your lust or your physical need, because lust is not just sex. You can lust for food. You can lust for power. You can lust for sleep. Anything that your body craves or desires is considered a lust. Okay? Lust in itself is not bad. Lust, when it's out of control and it causes you to harm others or harm yourself, that's when lust becomes a problem. I'm teaching good in here on tonight. And hopefully I'm getting some of you free. Okay? Paul had this perspective about not getting married. And the reason Paul didn't want to get married is because Paul believed that Jesus was going to come back in his lifetime. And he didn't have no time to be bothered with trying to take care of a wife and children. He was trying to do the work of the Lord because he was expecting Jesus to come back. You understand where I'm going with this? And so for us to try to apply to our lives the thing that's on the surface without understanding the reason, it puts us in bondage. Okay? I want to talk about another very important figure, as a matter of fact, as it relates to this whole idea of bodily pleasure. Okay? There's a person that you need to know. His name is St. Thomas Aquinas. If some of you went to a Catholic church, you've probably heard of St. Thomas Aquinas. Others of you who maybe have studied church history have heard of him. But St. Thomas Aquinas is one of the church fathers. He's from the 13th century. He was a philosopher and theologian. And he had this idea about sex and the body. Plato, also a philosopher, had some ideas about the body. Plato believed that the soul was divine, but the body was demonized. Okay? And if you read Kelly Brown Douglas, there's this book that I'm doing some work out of right now called Sexuality in the Black Church. She believes that Christianity, or Black Christianity in particular, is a Platonized Christianity, where we really believe, here's the book right here. We really believe that the body is bad. Anything about the body is bad. It's all about your spirit and your soul. Okay? But back to St. Thomas Aquinas. He didn't believe in this whole having sex for pleasure kind of thing. Yes, he said, I know sex is pleasurable. And that in and of itself is not a bad thing, but you should not have sex for that reason. He believed that sex was a necessary act between a husband and a wife so that they could procreate. He believed that sex was for procreation. So all of this rubbing and licking and all of this stuff that y'all do and touching just to make yourselves feel good without the intention of procreating, he believed that was sinful. And so St. Thomas Aquinas, y'all need to know who this brother is, because this idea, this thought, this ideology still pervades many churches today. That's why a lot of churches believe that there should be no contraception, wearing condoms or taking birth control pills. All of that stuff should not be. Okay? Because again, if you're going to have sex, you should expect that you're going to make a baby. That comes from St. Thomas Aquinas from the 13th century. Okay? Now remember, the evolution of morality, things change. We have to understand that. Okay? And where St. Thomas Aquinas was in his life, in his position in society, that may have worked for him and a few of his followers, but that doesn't work for most people. Okay? Let me go on. I already know I'm not going to make it through all of this, so we're going to have to figure out something else about getting to the rest of it. Okay? So y'all forgive me for that. Okay? So again, these ideas that come from Aquinas, these ideas that come from the philosopher Plato. Some of you have heard of Plato before, and many of you may not understand or recognize that a lot of these biblical writers and then the early church fathers, I guess I should say more, they would read this philosophy, and a lot of their theology is based in these secular philosophies. You didn't know those all married together, right? So Plato's ideas found themselves being introduced into these theologies. And we're living this now. And again, Kelly Brown Douglas talks about how oppressed, particularly black bodies and black sexuality is because of these old constructs. They don't fit. And they've messed a whole lot of people up. And we got to dig that stuff up. We got to deconstruct it so that we can reconstruct healthy ideas about human sexuality. Okay? Let me go farther. Okay? Let's see. Other things that are of concern in the church is talking about sexuality and talking about sexual orientation. Okay? I want to say very clearly that sexuality and sexual orientation cannot be conflated. They are not the same thing. Okay? Let me give you a simplified working definition of both. And then maybe we can talk about how they do this dance. Okay? Sexuality has to do with the feelings or the activities associated with someone's sexual desires. Okay, whatever those sexual desires are, the feelings and the activities associated with those desires are your sexuality. Your sexual orientation, however, is your identity. It's your identity in relationship to gender or genders to which one might be attracted or have sexual desires for. Okay? So your sexuality is about what you do. Your orientation, your sexual orientation is about who you are. Is that making sense? Okay? And so someone who may be of a heterosexual orientation may work their sexuality out in very conservative ways or very promiscuous ways. The same as a person who may be a homosexual person. They may even be celibate. That's how they live out their sexuality, is celibacy. But their orientation is still that they may be attracted or desire in some way someone of the same sex or same gender. I hope that makes sense. Sexuality is what you do. Your sexual orientation is how you express, how you see the world, who you are. Okay? And so these whole ideas about how people live out their sexuality have to do with all of these rules, what you can do, what you cannot do, whether it is moral or immoral. Someone's orientation is a whole other thing. And it is something that unfortunately still escapes comprehension for a lot of churches. And many of us, particularly for people who are considered non-heterosexual, there's a whole gamut I could talk about of what it means to be non-heterosexual. But a lot of people have gotten caught up because they're oriented in a certain way and they can't change how they feel. You can't change how your heart works. Okay? And the church has kind of messed that up. Some of them who consider themselves progressive and welcoming say, well, we understand that some people are born gay. And that's okay as long as they don't express it in their sexuality. In other words, you can be a homosexual. You just can't be a practicing homosexual. Anybody ever hear that kind of stuff before? You can't be a practicing. Well, what about people who are practicing heterosexuals? It is our orientation, and it is how we live it out. Okay? I just wanted to make that differentiation so that you understand that those two terms cannot be conflated. Sexuality is what you do. Your orientation is who you are. Let me go further. I'm gonna try to get one more in here. I got a whole other list down here, y'all. We're not gonna get to it. I may do Shake the Table again next week. I'm gonna check my schedule. We might just do back-to-backs because I need to get all of this out. Okay. This is gonna mess some of y'all up. Pin your wigs down. Make sure that your Fix-A-Dent is sure on tonight. Make sure you're sitting in a seat that's got sturdy legs on it. I want to talk about polyamory. 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 I have to keep saying it because I need you as an adult to understand that polyamory is a real thing. And here I go. Y'all they're going to take my preacher license from me. Polyamory is a real thing. And there is a way to be polyamorous and integrous. Here's another book I want to recommend to you. I know this is backward, but what that says is The Ethical Slut. The Ethical Slut. The Ethical Slut. The Ethical Slut. Okay? Some folks have just been sluts. Okay? But there is a way to understand who you are, how your heart works, and what your affectional and sexual desires might be. And for some people, as a matter of fact, a lot of people, they are not oriented to be monogamous. They are not. And when you study human sexuality, you will understand that. And this is the problem of these externally imposed religious constructs about sexuality. It is trying to force everyone to fit into the same mold, and everybody is not made up the same way. Everyone doesn't have the same orientation. Some people are they're not whores or hoes. They have a heart that is oriented towards polyamory. They can genuinely love more than one person. They can have sexual relation with more than one person. And there is a way to do that with integrity. Okay, and we got to talk about it. Now, remember, we talked about the evolution of morality. There was a reason I wanted to talk about that earlier, because there was a through line here, the evolution of morality. Okay? Because today, we say being polyamorous is inconsistent with the Christian identification. We say polyamory or polygamy, being married to more than one person, is against the law. But guess what? In 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 3, it talks about Solomon, King Solomon, the wisest, richest man that ever lived. He could give a masterclass on polyamory because in 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 3, it says he had 700 wives and 300 concubines, side pieces. This is in the Bible. This is King Solomon, who we herald as the wisest man to have ever lived. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. That is 1,000 women. And in his time and in his culture, that was not only accepted, but it was aspirational. A man could have as many wives as he could afford. So the number of women you had spoke to how much wealth you had. I'm just talking about the evolution of morality. Because that was not only cool during Solomon's time, but it was aspirational. Solomon's son, King David, had at least 7 wives. They say he may have had 8. And they say he had dozens of concubines. King David, the man after God's own heart, was slaying it within the confines of marriage. But we want to talk about biblical marriage. Biblical marriage was you can have as many wives as you could afford. Come on, somebody. It's in the book. So polyamory today, we like to judge people. We like to talk, ooh, you know, he with her and her, or she's got 2, whatever. Well, there are other cultures outside of postmodern Christianity where people, they're still polyamorous, and it is not frowned upon. Because in their society, their moral code says that this is okay, and maybe there's a prescribed way of doing it. And I want to, oh my God. I want to free us tonight. Am I saying that you should just go out and be with everybody and do everything? No, I am not saying that at all. What I am saying is that life and sex and sexuality and covenant can look different for different people, and they can still love God. Full stop. We are trying to make God say things that our societal constructs and moralities have said. Are y'all following me? And so, yes, there are people who are polyamorous. And yes, there are people who are doing it ethically. Because here's the thing. I'm going to have to end with this because I like to respect your time. Okay? But we're going to pick this up. Deacon Johnson, Bishop Flapjack, missionary so-and-so, a whole lot of them were polyamorous. Come on, somebody. Come on. Let's tell the truth and shame the devil. Some of these deacons and pastors, they got 2 whole sets of families, 2 houses on 2 different sides of the city. A woman over here and a set of kids over here, and another woman over here and another set of kids over here. They were doing it. They may have been condemning it in public, but they were certainly enjoying it in private. Come on. There are a lot of the saints that's got 2 sets of kids. And some of them kids is mingled up in between the other kids. But they love God. They'll preach you under the pew. They pray heaven down. They were operating in polyamory. They were just not doing it ethically. I know tables are broke all over the country right now. Because we shook them, but we got to shake this stuff up. Because there are too many of us who are messed up sexually. Because we were not given the tools to make good decisions about our sexuality. And it caused many of us to have very dysfunctional ideas about sexuality and maybe got involved in some very detrimental or harmful sexual situations that could have been avoided if we had been in families or churches who could talk about sex and sexuality in responsible ways. All right, I have to stop y'all. So I'm going to check my schedule and I'm going to let you all know if we're going to do part 2 on next Thursday. I just have to make sure that I'm available before I promise you that. Okay. Again, I want to recommend some books to you. Again, The Ethical Slut is one that you can get. This was it's kind of thick, but it's got some good stuff in it. This was actually required reading in one of my classes many semesters ago. Here's another book. It's called Sexuality and the Black Church. This is by Dr. Kelly Brown Douglas. She is one of my favorites. This actually is a seminal work when it comes to talking about human sexuality in the Black church. I'm going to talk some more about that in the part 2 of this. I normally don't do this, but I need to plug my own book. I wrote a book about 5 years ago called The Handbook, What the Bible Does and Does Not Say About Homosexuality, because there are a lot of us, whether we identify as homosexual or not, have some really unfortunate ideas about what the Bible says and does not say. And this really breaks down in a very easy way to read. This is a very short book, and it gives you some conversation pieces when that topic does come up, okay? I want us to be an informed people, okay? All of us are not going to go to seminary. As a matter of fact, all of us should not go to seminary. Okay. I am thankful that I had the opportunity to go. And as I promised you all a long time ago, for those of you who have been following me for some years, I said I was going to go to seminary. I was going to get this master's degree, and this was going to be our degree. So if anybody asks you, yeah, you have a Master of Theological Studies, and just reference me. I got Will Horn. By the way, I graduate on next Saturday, you all. And I cannot tell you how much I appreciate those of you who have prayed for me and supported me and pushed me to get to this point. But this degree means a lot because this is how we're all going to go up together. Okay. The last thing that I want to leave with you, well, I can't really pull it all over here. I've been getting equipment and stuff. The Shake the Table podcast is coming very soon. My mics are here. I got lights back here. All kinds of stuff is happening behind the scenes. But I do need to let you all know that I would love it if you all would support financially. Help me do some of this stuff because I'm wanting this to grow bigger and greater and for more people's lives to be blessed, okay? But it takes money for me to do that. And so if this ministry, because this is what it is, if this ministry has been a blessing to you, would you consider just saying, you know what, I'm going to partner with you, Will, and every month or whenever you feel like it, send something to the Cash App. Can y'all do that for me? It's $ Will Horn Ministries. Okay. And so instead of me putting all this information in a book and making you buy it, I try to make this as accessible to people as possible. But some of you are in a financial position and a heart position to be able to support. And so if you would do that for me. Someone is asking about the P.O. Box. You can send a check if you'd like to Will Horn Ministries. I'm going to put this in the chat somewhere. It is P.O. Box 174. That's Crandall, Texas, 75114. And again, for those of you who couldn't write it down, I'll put it to where you can get to it. Okay. But I really appreciate you all's support. I want to do great things. Okay. But it takes money to be able to do those things. And I believe that we can do them all together. Okay. I want you to know I love you all. I'm going to check my schedule, and by tomorrow, I will let you know if we can do part 2 of this on next Thursday, because I've got probably as much as I gave you tonight still left on my notes, and I need to get you this information, okay? All right, that's all I've got for you all tonight. I love you very, very much, and I look forward to seeing you all the next time, okay? Take care of yourselves.